The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of the grand ballroom, amber liquid spreading across the polished surface like spilled secrets. But the sound was nothing compared to the words that had just left Marcus Thompson's mouth, words that would cost him everything he'd spent 15 years building. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Rebecca Martinez is absolutely worthless to this company. I mean, look at her over there acting like she actually contributes something meaningful. The woman's been coasting for years, riding on everyone else's success. Honestly, I'm only keeping her around because firing her would be more paperwork than she's worth. The laughter that followed was sharp, cutting through the elegant atmosphere of Pinnacle Dynamics' annual gala. I stood 30 feet away, partially hidden behind a decorative pillar, watching the man I'd worked under for 8 years destroy my reputation with casual cruelty. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus was delivering this character assassination while wearing a tuxedo I'd helped him pick out, at a party celebrating the company's record-breaking quarter. A quarter that wouldn't have existed without my behind-the-scenes contributions. But Marcus didn't know that. He had no idea that the quiet, unassuming financial analyst standing in the shadows had just inherited $47 million from her grandmother's estate 3 months ago. He had no clue that I'd been discreetly investing in tech startups and real estate ventures, building a portfolio that would make his 6-figure salary look like pocket change. Most importantly, he was completely oblivious to the fact that I was the anonymous investor his company desperately needed to avoid bankruptcy. "She's like a ghost in the office," Marcus continued, his voice carrying across the room as more colleagues gathered around him. "Present but invisible, you know? Taking up space without adding value. Sometimes I wonder if she even knows what she's supposed to be doing." Jennifer Walsh from accounting shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting toward where I stood. She'd worked with me on several projects and knew exactly how integral my analysis had been to their success. But she said nothing, just like the others who knew the truth but lacked the courage to speak up. "I give her maybe 6 more months before I find a reason to let her go," Marcus announced, raising his whiskey glass as if toasting my professional demise. "The company's evolving, and dead weight like Rebecca has to go." That's when I decided Marcus Thompson was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his career. I'd started working at Pinnacle Dynamics fresh out of graduate school, young and eager to prove myself in the competitive world of corporate finance. The company specialized in developing software solutions for small businesses, a niche market that had exploded over the past decade. When I joined, we had 12 employees and annual revenue of $2 million. Now we employed over 200 people and were pulling in $30 million annually. Marcus had been my supervisor from day one, a charismatic leader who knew how to schmooze clients and charm investors. He was the face of the company, the one who took credit for our successes and deflected blame for our failures. What he wasn't, despite his impressive title and corner office, was particularly skilled at the technical aspects of financial analysis that actually drove our growth. That's where I came in. For 8 years, I'd been the invisible engine behind Marcus's visible success. Every client presentation he gave was built on my research. Every strategic decision he made was informed by my analysis. Every financial projection that impressed the board was crafted by my careful calculations. I worked late into the night, arrived early in the morning, and spent weekends refining reports that would bear his name and earn him bonuses that dwarfed my salary. I didn't mind being behind the scenes. I genuinely loved the work itself. The puzzle of financial data, the satisfaction of finding patterns others missed, the thrill of accurately predicting market trends. But I also wasn't naive about office politics. I kept detailed records of every project, every contribution, every idea that originated from my desk, but was presented as Marcus's innovation. The inheritance from my grandmother had changed everything, though Marcus didn't know it yet. Grandma Elena had been a shrewd businesswoman who'd quietly built a real estate empire while everyone assumed she was just a sweet old lady who baked cookies and tended her garden. When she passed, she left me not just money, but a network of investment opportunities and the wisdom to use them wisely. Over the past 3 months, I'd been learning a different side of business. Instead of just analyzing other people's companies, I was making strategic investments in promising startups. Instead of recommending financial strategies, I was implementing them with my own capital. The quiet analyst who sat in the back row of meetings was becoming a silent powerhouse in the investment world. But I'd also been watching Pinnacle Dynamics with growing concern. Despite our impressive revenue numbers, the company was hemorrhaging cash due to Marcus's poor strategic decisions. He'd been making expensive acquisitions that looked good on paper, but were actually draining our resources. He'd been hiring friends and family members for positions they weren't qualified for, creating a bloated payroll that was unsustainable. Most dangerously, he'd been taking on debt to fund expansion projects that weren't generating the returns he'd promised the board. The company needed a major cash infusion to survive the next 18 months. Marcus had been frantically courting investors, making presentation after presentation to venture capital firms and angel investors. He'd even hired an expensive consulting firm to help him craft the perfect pitch. What he didn't know was that one of the investors he'd been trying to reach was sitting 30 feet away from him, listening to him call her worthless. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus had submitted a proposal to Sterling Investment Group, the shell company I'd created to manage my investment activities. The proposal was desperate, poorly researched, and full of the kind of strategic blind spots that had been plaguing his decision-making for years. He was asking for $15 million to fund an expansion that would likely bankrupt the company within 2 years. I'd been planning to decline the investment not out of spite, but because it was genuinely a bad financial decision. But as I stood there listening to Marcus destroy my reputation in front of our colleagues, I realized there was a much more elegant solution to both problems. The next morning, I arrived at the office at my usual time, carrying my coffee and wearing the same understated professional attire I'd worn for 8 years. Nothing about my appearance suggested that I'd spent the previous evening crafting a plan that would fundamentally alter the power dynamics at Pinnacle Dynamics. Marcus was already in his office, door closed, probably nursing a hangover from the gala. I could see him through the glass partition, slumped in his chair with his head in his hands. The sight would have made me feel sorry for him if I hadn't heard his performance the night before. I settled at my desk and opened my laptop, pulling up the Sterling Investment Group portal. With a few keystrokes, I scheduled a meeting with Marcus for the following Friday. The meeting request was sent from my shell company's official email address, with no indication that it was connected to the quiet analyst who sat just outside his office. The email was simple and professional. Sterling Investment Group would like to schedule a meeting to discuss your recent investment proposal. We believe there may be opportunities for mutual benefit. Please confirm your availability for Friday at 2 p.m. 20 minutes later, I heard Marcus's chair creak as he bolted upright. Through the glass, I watched him frantically refresh his email, read the message again, and then pump his fist in the air like he'd just won the lottery. The irony was delicious. The man who'd called me worthless was celebrating what he thought was his salvation, completely unaware that his salvation was sitting 30 feet away, calmly reviewing quarterly reports. Marcus spent the rest of the week in a frenzy of preparation. He called emergency meetings with the executive team, demanded updated financial projections, and had the conference room professionally cleaned and redecorated. He even bought a new suit for the occasion, an expensive Italian number that probably cost more than I made in a month. I watched it all with detached amusement, continuing to perform my regular duties while Marcus transformed from the confident leader who'd humiliated me at the gala into an anxious supplicant, desperate to impress his potential savior. He had no idea that his potential savior was already intimately familiar with every aspect of his business, having been the one actually running the financial analysis for years. By Thursday, Marcus's anxiety had reached fever pitch. He'd rehearsed his presentations so many times that other employees were starting to avoid him. He'd changed the conference room setup 3 times, ordered catering from the city's most expensive restaurant, and even hired a professional photographer to document the meeting for potential marketing materials. The transformation was remarkable. The man who'd stood confidently at the gala, casually destroying my reputation, was now desperate and vulnerable. He'd put all his hopes on this one meeting, betting everything on his ability to charm an investor he'd never met. What Marcus didn't understand was that I'd already made my decision. I wasn't going to save his company. I was going to save the company from him. The investment would happen, but not in the way he expected. And when it did, Marcus Thompson would learn exactly how much the worthless Rebecca Martinez was really worth. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel charged with possibility. I dressed carefully, choosing a conservative navy suit that projected competence without calling attention to itself. To Marcus and everyone else at the office, I was just another employee starting another day. But I knew that by evening, everything would be different. The morning crawled by as Marcus made his final preparations. He'd commandeered 3 junior employees to help him set up the conference room, arranging and rearranging chairs with the precision of a military operation. The catered lunch arrived at noon, filling the office with the aroma of expensive food that most of us would never taste. At 1:30 p.m., Marcus stood in the lobby, adjusting his tie and checking his watch every 30 seconds. He'd positioned himself with a clear view of the entrance, ready to greet his potential investor with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for long-lost relatives. I sat at my desk, quietly finishing up some reports, while watching the man who'd called me worthless pace back and forth like a caged animal. In 30 minutes, Marcus Thompson's world was about to change forever. And this time, I wouldn't be invisible. At exactly 2 p.m., a black Mercedes sedan pulled into the Pinnacle Dynamics parking lot. Marcus straightened his tie for the 100th time, smoothed down his hair, and walked toward the entrance, with the kind of forced confidence that barely concealed his desperation. I watched from my desk as a woman in an expensive charcoal suit stepped out of the car. She was in her 40s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. This was Sarah Chen, the managing director I'd hired through Sterling Investment Group to represent my interests. She had no idea who the real investor was. As far as she knew, she was working for a wealthy client who preferred to remain anonymous. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Mr. Thompson, Sarah's voice carried across the lobby as Marcus practically sprinted to meet her. Yes, welcome to Pinnacle Dynamics. I'm Marcus Thompson, CEO. He extended his hand with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever meeting a new friend. Thank you so much for coming. I can't tell you how excited we are about this opportunity. Sarah shook his hand with professional courtesy, her expression neutral. I'm Sarah Chen, representing Sterling Investment Group. I trust we can have a productive conversation about your proposal. As they walked toward the conference room, Marcus launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech about the company's history, its innovative products, and its bright future. Sarah nodded politely, occasionally asking questions that I knew would make Marcus uncomfortable because they went straight to the heart of the company's actual problems. Your revenue growth has been impressive, Sarah said as they settled into the conference room. But I'm curious about your cash flow situation. The numbers in your proposal seem optimistic, given your current debt obligations. Marcus's smile flickered for just a moment before he launched into an explanation about strategic investments and temporary cash flow adjustments. I could see the sweat beginning to form on his forehead as Sarah's questions became more pointed. I see you've made several acquisitions in the past 2 years, Sarah continued, consulting her notes. Can you walk me through the ROI on those investments? This was where Marcus's lack of financial acumen became painfully obvious. He started throwing around numbers that didn't add up, making claims about market penetration that weren't supported by the data. I'd prepared Sarah well. Every question she asked was designed to expose the gaps in Marcus's understanding of his own company's finances. Perhaps we could review some of the underlying financial analysis, Sarah suggested. I'd like to understand the methodology behind these projections. Marcus's face went pale. Of course. Let me get our financial analyst to join us. Rebecca handles most of the detailed number work. And just like that, Marcus was forced to summon the woman he'd called worthless to save his most important meeting. The irony was so perfect, I almost laughed out loud. Rebecca Martinez, I said, extending my hand to Sarah as I entered the conference room. I handle financial analysis and strategic planning for Pinnacle Dynamics. Sarah shook my hand, her expression unchanged. Pleasure to meet you, Rebecca. I was just asking Mr. Thompson about the methodology behind your growth projections. For the next hour, I walked Sarah through the real financial picture of Pinnacle Dynamics. Unlike Marcus's surface-level presentation, I provided detailed analysis of cash flow patterns, debt service obligations, and market positioning. I explained the challenges facing the company while also highlighting the genuine opportunities for growth. Marcus sat in increasingly uncomfortable silence as it became clear that I understood the business far better than he did. Every question Sarah asked was answered with precision and depth, revealing the stark contrast between his superficial knowledge and my comprehensive understanding. "These are sophisticated analyses," Sarah noted, reviewing the documents I'd prepared. "The financial modeling is quite impressive." "Rebecca's our number person," Marcus said, trying to regain some relevance in the conversation. "She's very thorough with the details." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. Even now, even when my expertise was clearly impressing the investor he desperately needed, Marcus couldn't resist diminishing my contributions. It was exactly the kind of behavior that had made my decision easier. "I'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting," Sarah said as the formal presentation concluded. "There are some additional due diligence items we'll need to review before making a final decision." Marcus's relief was palpable. "Of course, whatever you need. We're completely open to any additional review." "Actually," Sarah said, closing her portfolio, "I'd prefer to work directly with Ms. Martinez on the financial analysis. She seems to have the most comprehensive understanding of the company's position." The color drained from Marcus's face. "Well, I'd certainly want to be involved in any ongoing discussions." "Of course," Sarah replied smoothly. "But the detailed financial work is best handled by your analyst. We'll schedule something for next week." As Sarah left the building, Marcus watched her go with a mixture of hope and anxiety. He had gotten his foot in the door, but he could sense that control of the situation was slipping away from him. "Good work in there," he said to me, his tone grudging. "Keep me updated on whatever she needs." I nodded professionally. "Of course, I'll handle the follow-up analysis." That evening, I sat in my apartment, a glass of wine in hand, reflecting on the day's events. The plan was working perfectly, but more importantly, I was finally seeing Marcus for what he truly was. Not the confident leader he pretended to be, but an insecure man who'd built his career on other people's work. The next week, Sarah and I met at a coffee shop downtown, away from the office. She'd reviewed the additional financial documents I'd provided and had some pointed observations about Pinnacle Dynamics' situation. "Your company is in serious trouble," she said bluntly. "The cash flow problems are worse than your CEO seems to understand. Without significant intervention, you'll be insolvent within 18 months. I nodded. "I know. I've been trying to address these issues for months, but my recommendations haven't been implemented." Sarah studied me carefully. "You're remarkably candid about your employer's problems. Most people would be more defensive." "There's no point in being defensive about facts," I replied. "The numbers don't lie, even when people prefer not to see them." "What would you do if you were in charge?" Sarah asked. This was the opening I'd been waiting for. "Complete restructuring. Eliminate the unprofitable acquisitions, reduce overhead by 30%, and focus on our core competencies. The company has good bones, but it needs surgical intervention to survive." Sarah leaned back in her chair. "That's a radical approach. Your CEO would never agree to that level of change." "No," I agreed. "He wouldn't, which is why the company needs new leadership." Our conversation continued for another hour, with Sarah asking detailed questions about my vision for Pinnacle Dynamics' future. I outlined a comprehensive restructuring plan that would not only save the company, but position it for sustainable growth. By the time we parted ways, I could see the wheels turning in Sarah's mind. Over the following days, Marcus became increasingly agitated. He'd call me into his office multiple times a day, demanding updates on the investment discussions. He'd hover around my desk, trying to overhear my phone calls. His anxiety was palpable, and it was affecting his ability to focus on anything else. "What's taking so long?" he asked on Thursday, pacing behind my desk. "It's been a week since the meeting. Shouldn't they have made a decision by now?" "These things take time," I replied calmly. "They're conducting thorough due diligence. That's actually a good sign. It means they're taking the investment seriously." Marcus stopped pacing. "You think they're going to invest?" I looked up from my computer. "I think they're going to make an offer. Whether it's the offer you're expecting is a different question." The color drained from Marcus's face. "What do you mean?" "Investment firms don't just provide money, Marcus. They provide oversight. They want to ensure their investment is protected, which usually means having a say in strategic decisions." Marcus's hands clenched into fists. "I'm not giving up control of my company." "It may not be your choice," I said quietly. Companies that need $15 million in emergency funding don't usually have the luxury of dictating terms. That afternoon, Sarah called to schedule another meeting. This time, she wanted to meet with the entire executive team, including Marcus. The meeting was set for the following Monday, and I could sense that this would be the moment of truth. Marcus spent the weekend in a state of barely controlled panic. He called me twice at home, demanding to know what Sarah had said during our follow-up meetings. He seemed to sense that something was shifting, but he couldn't put his finger on what. May. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray, overcast sky that matched Marcus's mood. He'd been in his office since 7 a.m., pacing and muttering to himself. The entire executive team was on edge, sensing that their futures hung in the balance. At 10 a.m. sharp, Sarah arrived, but she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by two other people. A man in his 50s who introduced himself as the senior partner at Sterling Investment Group, and a younger woman who was identified as their corporate restructuring specialist. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began once everyone was seated in the conference room. "We've completed our due diligence on Pinnacle Dynamics, and we're prepared to make an offer." Marcus leaned forward eagerly. "That's wonderful news. We're ready to hear your terms." Sarah exchanged glances with her colleagues. "Before we discuss terms, I need to be clear about Sterling Investment Group's assessment of your company's situation. You're facing imminent insolvency. Your debt service obligations exceed your cash flow by a significant margin. Your recent acquisitions have been value destructive, and your operational efficiency has declined dramatically over the past 2 years." The room fell silent. Marcus's face went white. "However," Sarah continued, "we believe the company has strong underlying assets and significant potential for growth under proper management. We're prepared to invest $20 million to stabilize the company and fund strategic growth initiatives." Marcus's relief was visible. "$20 million? That's even more than we requested." "There are conditions," Sarah said firmly. "The investment requires immediate implementation of a comprehensive restructuring plan. This includes divesting unprofitable assets, reducing operational costs, and installing new leadership with proven expertise in financial management and strategic planning." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus's mouth opened and closed without sound. "Are you saying," he finally managed, "that you want to replace me?" Sarah's expression was businesslike but not unkind. "We're saying that Sterling Investment Group requires experienced leadership to protect our investment. The current management structure has demonstrated inability to address the company's fundamental challenges." Marcus looked around the table desperately, seeking support from his executive team, but they were all staring at their hands, unwilling to meet his eyes. They'd heard the same assessment I had, and they knew it was accurate. "This is my company," Marcus said, his voice rising. "I built this from nothing. I'm not walking away." "You're not being asked to walk away," Sarah replied calmly. "You're being offered the opportunity to remain with the company in a consulting capacity, focusing on client relationships and business development. However, operational control would transfer to new leadership." Marcus's hands were shaking now. "And who exactly would this new leadership be?" Sarah smiled for the first time since the meeting began. "We'd like to offer the position of Chief Executive Officer to Rebecca Martinez." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at me with a mixture of shock, rage, and something that might have been recognition. For the first time, he was seeing me not as the invisible analyst who handled his paperwork, but as the person who'd been running his company all along. "Rebecca?" he whispered. I met his gaze steadily. "The offer is contingent on my acceptance, of course. But yes, Sterling Investment Group has asked me to lead the company's restructuring and growth strategy." Marcus's world was collapsing around him, and I could see the exact moment when he realized that the woman he'd called worthless was about to become his boss. The conference room felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, his face cycling through emotions faster than a slot machine. Shock, disbelief, rage, and finally, a dawning understanding that his world had fundamentally shifted. "I need a moment," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. This is a lot to process." Sarah Chen nodded professionally. "Of course, we understand this is significant news. Perhaps we should take a 15-minute break to allow everyone to collect their thoughts. As the Sterling Investment Group team filed out of the conference room, Marcus remained seated, staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. The other executives, Jennifer from accounting, David from operations, and Lisa from marketing, quietly slipped out, leaving us alone. "How?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. When did you? I leaned back in my chair, maintaining the same calm demeanor I'd displayed throughout the meeting. How did I do that, Marcus? How did I convince a major investment firm to offer me a CEO position? How did I demonstrate the competence to run a company? His jaw tightened. You know what I mean. This is impossible. You're a financial analyst. You don't have the connections, the experience, The what? I interrupted. The authority? The gravitas. The male confidence that you've been coasting on for 8 years? Marcus's face flushed red. I built this company from nothing. I made the strategic decisions. I brought in the clients. You took credit for work you didn't do, I said, my voice cutting through his bluster like a blade. Every strategic decision was based on analysis I provided. Every client presentation was built on research I conducted. Every financial projection that impressed investors was created by my models. The truth hung between us like a toxic cloud. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. He knew I was right, and for the first time in 8 years, he couldn't deflect or minimize my contributions. But the connections, he stammered. The networking, the relationships with investors. I smiled, and there was nothing pleasant about it. You mean the relationships you've been desperately trying to build for months? The meetings you've been begging for? The investment proposals you've been submitting to anyone who would listen? Marcus's face went pale. You knew about Sterling Investment Group before they contacted us. I knew about them because I am them, I said simply. Sterling Investment Group is my company, Marcus. I'm the anonymous investor you've been trying to impress. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Marcus stared at me as if I'd just told him I was secretly an alien from Mars. That's impossible, he whispered. I pulled out my phone and opened the Sterling Investment Group management portal. The screen showed my full administrative access, complete with transaction histories, portfolio summaries, and most importantly, the $15 million investment proposal submitted by Pinnacle Dynamics. 3 months ago, I inherited $47 million from my grandmother, I said, showing him the screen. I used that money to establish Sterling Investment Group as a vehicle for my investments. Your company has been one of many proposals I've reviewed. Marcus's hands were shaking as he reached for the phone, but I pulled it back. You wanted to know how I convinced an investment firm to offer me a CEO position, I continued. I didn't convince them, I instructed them. Sarah Chen works for me, Marcus. The senior partner works for me. The restructuring specialist works for me. This entire process has been orchestrated by me. The color drained from Marcus's face completely. You're saying you've been planning this? That you set this whole thing up? I'm saying that when you stood at the company gala and called me worthless, you made a very expensive mistake, I replied. You humiliated me in front of our colleagues, dismissed my contributions, and announced your intention to fire me. So I decided to show you exactly what worthless looks like. Marcus slumped back in his chair, the fight going out of him like air from a punctured balloon. This is revenge. You're destroying my company for revenge. I'm not destroying your company, I said firmly. I'm saving it. The financial analysis I presented to Sarah was accurate. Pinnacle Dynamics will be insolvent within 18 months under current management. You've made a series of catastrophic decisions that have put everyone's jobs at risk. I pulled out a folder from my briefcase and slid it across the table. This is my restructuring plan, the one I've been trying to get you to implement for 2 years. Eliminate the unprofitable acquisitions, reduce operational overhead, focus on core competencies. Simple, straightforward, and effective. Marcus opened the folder with trembling hands. The document was comprehensive, detailed, and professionally presented. It was also familiar. I'd submitted variations of this plan to him 17 times over the past 2 years, and he'd dismissed it each time. You've seen this before, he said, his voice barely audible. Multiple times. You called it overly conservative, and, quote, lacking vision. You said I didn't understand the big picture, that I was too focused on short-term concerns. I leaned forward. Well, Marcus, those short-term concerns are now long-term problems. And they're about to become terminal unless someone with actual financial expertise takes control. Marcus looked up from the document, his eyes desperate. What do you want? Money? A promotion? I can make you VP of Finance, give you a raise, whatever you need. I want what I've always wanted, I said simply. I want to do my job properly. I want to run a company based on sound financial principles, instead of ego and wishful thinking. I want to build something sustainable instead of watching it slowly collapse under mismanagement. But you can't just take over like this. The board will never approve it. I smiled again, and this time it was genuinely amused. Marcus, who do you think owns 43% of this company's outstanding shares? His mouth fell open. What? Sterling Investment Group has been quietly acquiring Pinnacle Dynamics stock for the past 6 weeks. Combined with the new investment, I'll control a majority stake. The board doesn't have a choice. They can approve the restructuring or watch the company collapse. Marcus was beyond shock now. He was in a state of complete cognitive dissonance, unable to process how thoroughly his world had been turned upside down. The employees, he said desperately, they'll never accept this. They respect me, they trust my leadership. Do they? I asked. Because when you called me worthless at the gala, I noticed that several people looked uncomfortable. They didn't laugh, Marcus. They didn't agree with you. They just stood there, embarrassed by your behavior. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where employees were returning from lunch. The truth is, most of them have been concerned about the company's direction for months. They've seen the financial reports, they know about the debt problems, and they're worried about their jobs. They don't respect your leadership, Marcus. They're terrified of it. Marcus joined me at the window, his reflection showing a man who'd aged 10 years in the past hour. So what happens now? You fire me? Humiliate me the way you think I humiliated you? I turned to face him. I don't think you humiliated me, Marcus. You did humiliate me. In front of our colleagues, you called me worthless, announced your intention to fire me, and treated me like a joke. The question is, what are you going to do about it? What do you mean? I mean, you have a choice. You can accept the consulting position Sarah offered, work with me to transition the company leadership, and maintain some dignity in this process. Or you can fight it, make a scene, and watch everything collapse around you. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the reality of his situation. If I accept the consulting position, what would that look like? You'd handle client relations and business development, the things you're actually good at. You'd work under my direction, but you'd still be part of the company. Your salary would be reduced, but you'd have the opportunity to rebuild your reputation. And if I refuse? Then Sterling Investment Group withdraws the offer, the company goes bankrupt, and everyone loses their jobs. Including you. Marcus leaned against the window, his breath fogging the glass. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I've had 3 months to plan this, Marcus. 3 months to think about what you said at that party, 3 months to decide how to respond. This isn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It's a carefully calculated business strategy. The door to the conference room opened, and Sarah Chen stepped inside. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to get back to the meeting. The Sterling Investment Group team has additional items to discuss. Marcus straightened his tie and tried to compose himself. Of course, let's finish this. As we walked back to the conference room, Marcus looked at me with something approaching respect for the first time in 8 years. You know, I always wondered why you stayed. Why you put up with, why you didn't leave for a better opportunity. I stayed because I believed in the company's potential, I replied. I just didn't believe in your ability to realize it. The Sterling Investment Group team was already seated when we returned. Sarah consulted her notes and addressed the room with professional efficiency. We've prepared the preliminary investment documents, she announced. The restructuring plan will begin immediately upon signing. Ms. Martinez will assume the CEO position within 30 days, and Mr. Thompson will transition to his new role as Director of Client Relations. Marcus sat down heavily, the weight of his new reality settling on his shoulders. I need to think about this. Of course, Sarah replied. You have until close of business tomorrow to make your decision. However, I should mention that this offer is time-sensitive. Sterling Investment Group has other opportunities under consideration. As the meeting concluded and the investors prepared to leave, Marcus caught my arm. Rebecca, I owe you an apology for what I said at the party, for how I've treated you over the years. You deserve better. I looked at him for a long moment. Yes, Marcus, I do deserve better. And now I'm going to make sure I get it. The next morning, Marcus Thompson submitted his resignation as CEO of Pinnacle Dynamics and accepted the position of Director of Client Relations. The announcement sent shockwaves through the company, but as I began implementing the restructuring plan, it became clear that the changes were not only necessary but long overdue. The woman who had once been called worthless was now in charge of everything, and she was just getting started. The first Monday morning as CEO of Pinnacle Dynamics felt surreal. I arrived at the office at 7:30 a.m., the same time I'd been coming in for 8 years, but everything was different. The parking space closest to the building, formerly Marcus's reserved spot, now had a temporary sign reading, R. Martinez, CEO. The security guard, Carlos, did a double-take when he saw me walking toward the executive entrance. Morning, Ms. Martinez. Congratulations on the promotion. Thank you, Carlos. How's your daughter doing with her college applications? His face lit up. She got into State University, pre-med program. Thank you for asking. I'd made it a point to learn personal details about every employee over the years, something Marcus had never bothered with. These weren't just workers to me. They were people whose livelihoods depended on the decisions I was about to make. The executive floor was buzzing with nervous energy. Word had spread quickly about the change in leadership, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. I had scheduled an all-hands meeting for 10 a.m., but first, I had some individual conversations to conduct. My first stop was Jennifer Walsh in accounting. She looked up nervously as I approached her desk. Jennifer, could we talk in my office? She followed me to what had been Marcus's corner office, now mine. The space felt foreign, too large and imposing for someone who'd spent 8 years in a cubicle. I wanted to discuss your role going forward, I began, settling behind the massive oak desk. I know you've been concerned about the company's financial situation. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. I've tried to raise some concerns with Marcus, with Mr. Thompson, but he said not to worry about it. What kind of concerns? The cash flow reports, the debt service ratios, the acquisition costs. The numbers haven't been adding up for months. She paused, then added quietly, I was afraid to push too hard because I need this job. I nodded. You are right to be concerned. Those issues are exactly why the restructuring is necessary. I want you to know that your position is secure, and I value your attention to detail. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. I was so worried about layoffs. There will be some layoffs, I said honestly. But they'll be strategic, focused on eliminating redundancies and underperforming positions. People who've been doing good work, like you, have nothing to worry about. Similar conversations followed with other key employees. David from operations, who'd been frustrated by Marcus's impulsive equipment purchases. Lisa from marketing, who'd watched expensive campaigns fail because they weren't based on solid market research. Each of them had been quietly concerned about the company's direction, but had felt powerless to speak up. By 9:45 a.m., word had spread that the new CEO was personally meeting with staff members. The mood in the office had shifted from nervous anticipation to cautious optimism. These people had been working under a cloud of uncertainty for months, and they were hungry for clear leadership. At exactly 10 a.m., I stood before the assembled company in the main conference room. Every employee was present, from senior managers to entry-level assistants. Marcus stood at the back of the room, his face carefully neutral. Good morning, everyone. I know this transition has been sudden, and you probably have questions about what comes next. I want to be transparent about our situation and my plans for the company. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, a financial overview that laid out the harsh reality of Pinnacle Dynamics' position. We're facing serious challenges. Our debt-to-revenue ratio is unsustainable. Our recent acquisitions have been losing money rather than generating profit. Without significant changes, we'll be forced to close our doors within 18 months. A murmur ran through the room. Some employees looked shocked, others nodded as if they'd suspected as much. However, I continued, I believe this company has tremendous potential. Our core software products are excellent. Our customer satisfaction rates are high. We have talented people and strong market position. What we need is focused execution and sound financial management. I clicked to the next slide, showing the restructuring plan I'd been developing for years. Over the next 90 days, we'll be implementing a comprehensive restructuring plan. This will include divesting unprofitable acquisitions, streamlining operations, and refocusing on our core competencies. There will be some difficult decisions, including layoffs in certain departments. The room was completely silent now. I could see the anxiety on faces throughout the audience. I want to be clear about something, I said, setting down my presentation remote. Every decision I make will be based on what's best for the long-term health of this company. I'm not interested in quick fixes or cosmetic changes. We're going to build something sustainable. A hand went up in the middle of the room. It was Tom Bradley, one of the senior developers. What about the people who get laid off? What kind of support will they receive? Excellent question. Anyone who's affected by layoffs will receive generous severance packages, extended healthcare benefits, and career transition support. We're also working with several partner companies to help place people in new positions. Another hand went up. What about the company culture? Are we going to become one of those corporate environments where everything is about numbers and efficiency? I smiled at that. The company culture is going to become more professional and more focused, but it's also going to become more fair. Performance will be based on actual contributions, not politics or favoritism. Good work will be recognized and rewarded. The questions continued for another 30 minutes. Each one gave me an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of leadership the company had been missing. Instead of vague platitudes or defensive responses, I provided specific, actionable information. As the meeting concluded, I noticed something interesting. The employees weren't looking at Marcus for guidance or approval, they were looking at me. The psychological transition was already happening. They were beginning to accept me as their actual leader. After the meeting, I spent the rest of the day in individual sessions with department heads, reviewing their operations and identifying areas for improvement. The picture that emerged was exactly what I'd expected: a company with good people and good products, hampered by poor strategic decisions and lack of financial discipline. That evening, I stayed late to review the acquisition documents that had been draining our resources. The first acquisition was a small software company that Marcus had purchased for $3 million. According to the documentation, it was supposed to complement our existing products and expand our market reach. The reality was different. The acquired company's technology was outdated, its customer base was declining, and its talented employees had left shortly after the acquisition. We'd spent $3 million for essentially nothing. The second acquisition was even worse. Marcus had purchased a marketing agency for $4.5 million, believing it would give us better control over our advertising and brand development. Instead, we'd inherited a company with terrible client relationships, outstanding legal issues, and no clear revenue stream. Both acquisitions would need to be divested immediately, which meant absorbing significant losses. But it also meant stopping the bleeding and allowing us to focus on what we did well. Over the following weeks, I implemented the restructuring plan with surgical precision. The unprofitable acquisitions were sold, even at a loss. Redundant positions were eliminated, but with the generous severance packages I'd promised. Equipment leases were renegotiated, vendor contracts were reviewed, and operational procedures were streamlined. The most challenging part wasn't the financial restructuring, it was managing the psychological transformation of the workplace. For 8 years, Marcus had created an environment where politics mattered more than performance, where loyalty was valued over competence, and where questioning leadership was discouraged. I needed to create a new culture, one based on merit, transparency, and accountability. This meant having difficult conversations with employees who'd been coasting under the old system, while also empowering people who'd been marginalized despite their talent. One of the most satisfying moments came 3 weeks into the restructuring. I was reviewing quarterly reports when Jennifer from accounting knocked on my door. "Rebecca, I wanted to show you something." She handed me a printout showing our cash flow projections. For the first time in 18 months, we're going to be cash flow positive next quarter. I studied the numbers, feeling a surge of satisfaction. These look great. How did you factor in the divestiture costs? I used the conservative estimates you provided, but I think we might do even better. The marketing agency sale is attracting more interest than expected. This was exactly what I'd been hoping for. Employees taking initiative, thinking strategically, and contributing to solutions rather than just following orders. Excellent work, Jennifer. I want you to present these projections to the board next week. Her eyes widened. Me? Present to the board? You did the analysis, you should get the credit. It's time we start recognizing the people who actually do the work. As Jennifer left my office, practically glowing with pride, I reflected on how different this was from the Marcus era. He would have taken her analysis, presented it as his own insight, and left her name off the presentation entirely. But the real test of the new Pinnacle dynamics came 6 weeks into the restructuring, when we landed our biggest contract in company history. Tech Global, a Fortune 500 company, had been considering our software solutions for months. Under Marcus's leadership, the negotiations had stalled repeatedly, due to concerns about our financial stability. I'd personally taken over the Tech Global negotiations, bringing Jennifer to present our financial projections and David to demonstrate our technical capabilities. Instead of Marcus's usual approach of overpromising and hoping for the best, we'd been honest about our capabilities and delivered detailed, realistic proposals. The contract was worth $12 million over 3 years, more than enough to secure our immediate financial future and fund strategic growth initiatives. When I announced the Tech Global contract at the next all-hands meeting, the response was electric. Employees who'd been worried about their jobs just 2 months earlier were now talking about expansion opportunities and career advancement. But perhaps the most telling moment came when Marcus approached me after the meeting. "Congratulations on the Tech Global contract," he said. "That's a game changer for the company." "Thank you," I replied. Though I should point out that Tech Global specifically mentioned our improved financial transparency as a key factor in their decision. Marcus nodded slowly. "I can see that. The company feels different now. More professional. More competent," I corrected. "We're finally operating like the successful business we always had the potential to be." He was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised me. "I owe you more than an apology, Rebecca. I owe you recognition. You've been the real leader of this company for years, and I was too arrogant to see it." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-serving behavior. Instead, I saw genuine remorse and, perhaps more importantly, genuine respect. "I appreciate that, Marcus, and I want you to know that your client relationship skills are valuable. In your new role, you'll be crucial to our continued success." It was true. Marcus might have been a poor CEO, but he was an excellent salesperson and relationship builder. Under proper guidance, those skills could be assets rather than liabilities. 3 months after taking over as CEO, I stood in the same conference room where Marcus had announced my worthless status to the board of directors. But this time, I was presenting our quarterly results to a room full of investors, board members, and senior staff. "Revenue is up 18% quarter over quarter," I announced. "Our debt-to-equity ratio has improved from 2.1 to 1.3. Customer satisfaction scores are at an all-time high, and we have a pipeline of new contracts worth over $30 million. The board members nodded approvingly. These were the same people who'd been quietly concerned about the company's direction under Marcus's leadership. Now they were seeing what competent management could accomplish. "Most importantly," I continued, "we've built a sustainable foundation for growth. Our financial position is stable, our operations are efficient, and our team is focused on delivering value to our customers." As I concluded the presentation, I caught sight of Marcus in the back of the room. He was smiling. Not the forced smile of someone trying to save face, but the genuine smile of someone who finally understood what real leadership looked like. The transformation was complete. The woman who'd been called worthless had not only saved the company, but had turned it into something stronger than it had ever been. And she was just getting started. To incise. 6 months after the restructuring, I found myself back in the grand ballroom where this entire story had begun. But this time, I wasn't hiding behind a pillar, watching my reputation get destroyed. I was standing at the podium, addressing the annual shareholders meeting as the CEO of the most successful software company in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, looking out at the crowd of investors, board members, and industry leaders. 1 year ago, Pinnacle Dynamics was 18 months away from bankruptcy. Today, we're announcing our most profitable quarter in company history, with revenue growth of 42% and a net profit margin of 18%. The applause was genuine and sustained. In the front row, I spotted several investors who'd rejected Marcus's funding proposals just months earlier. Now they were sitting in the audience, wishing they'd recognized the opportunity when it was presented to them. But numbers only tell part of the story, I continued. The real transformation has been cultural. We've created an environment where merit matters more than politics, where innovation is rewarded over conformity, and where every employee has a stake in our success. I clicked to the next slide, showing our employee satisfaction scores. Our internal surveys show that job satisfaction has increased by 68%, voluntary turnover has dropped to less than 5%, and productivity metrics are at record highs. From the back of the room, I caught sight of Marcus. He was wearing a new suit, not as expensive as his old ones, but well-tailored and professional. His role as Director of Client Relations had evolved into something more significant than either of us had initially expected. He'd become genuinely good at what he did when he wasn't trying to manage things he didn't understand. I want to recognize some of the people who've made this transformation possible, I said, gesturing toward the Pinnacle Dynamics table. Jennifer Walsh, our Director of Financial Planning, whose analysis has been crucial to our strategic decisions. David Chen, our Director of Operations, who streamlined our processes and eliminated waste. Lisa Rodriguez, our Director of Marketing, who repositioned our brand and expanded our market reach. Each person I named stood briefly, acknowledging the recognition. These were people who'd been working in Marcus's shadow for years, their contributions minimized or ignored. Now they are being celebrated at the industry's most important annual event. And I want to acknowledge Marcus Thompson, whose client relationship expertise has been instrumental in our recent contract successes. The Tech Global deal I mentioned earlier? That happened because Marcus understood their corporate culture and helped us tailor our approach accordingly. Marcus looked surprised at the public recognition. Under his old management style, he would have taken credit for everyone else's work. Now he was learning what it felt like to receive credit for his actual contributions. After the presentation, the networking portion of the evening began. I found myself surrounded by executives from other companies, all wanting to understand how we'd achieved such a dramatic turnaround in such a short time. The key, I explained to a group from a competing firm, was recognizing that our problems weren't technical or market-related. They were management-related. We had good people, good products, and a good market position. We just needed leadership that could effectively utilize those assets. But how did you identify what needed to change? Asked Patricia Hoffman, CEO of Digital Solutions, Inc. I'd been analyzing those problems for years, I replied. The difference was that I finally had the authority to implement solutions instead of just recommending them. The conversation continued for another hour, with industry leaders asking detailed questions about our restructuring process, our financial turnaround, and our growth strategy. It was gratifying to be recognized as an expert rather than dismissed as just another employee. Around 9 p.m., I stepped outside onto the hotel's terrace for some fresh air. The city lights stretched out below, and I could see the Pinnacle Dynamics building in the distance, lit up with our new logo and signage. "Quite a view," said a voice behind me. I turned to find Marcus approaching, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. He offered one to me. "Thank you for what you said there," he said. "About the Tech Global contract, you didn't have to give me credit for that." "You earned that credit," I replied. "You did excellent work on that account. That's what good leadership does. It recognizes genuine contributions." Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring out at the city. "I've been thinking a lot about that night. The party where where I said those things about you. And? I was scared, he said simply. The company was struggling, I knew I was in over my head, and I was terrified that people would figure out how much I didn't know. So I deflected by diminishing others, especially you. I studied his profile in the dim light. Why especially me? Because you made me feel incompetent. Every time you'd present analysis or suggest a strategy, I'd realize how much I didn't understand about my own company. Instead of learning from you, I convinced myself that you were the problem. Marcus turned to face me directly. I called you worthless because I was afraid you'd realize that I was the worthless one. It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. You're not worthless, Marcus. You were just in the wrong role. You're an excellent salesperson and relationship builder. You just weren't cut out to be a CEO. No, he agreed. I wasn't. But you were. You'd been doing the job for years while I took the credit. We stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the city lights twinkle below. The conversation felt like the closing of a chapter, not just in our professional relationship, but in both of our personal growth. What's next for you? I asked. I'm thinking about starting my own consulting firm, Marcus said. Client relations and business development for small tech companies. There's a real need for that kind of specialized service. That sounds perfect for your skill set. Let me know if you need any references or introductions. Marcus smiled. I might take you up on that. And Rebecca? Congratulations on everything you've accomplished. You've built something really special here. The following Monday morning brought news that would define the next phase of Pinnacle Dynamics' growth. I was reviewing quarterly projections when my assistant knocked on my door. Rebecca, there's someone here to see you. Says it's about a potential acquisition opportunity. I looked up from my computer. Do we have an appointment scheduled? No, but she says it's time sensitive. Her name is Catherine Wells, and she's from Aurora Technologies. Aurora Technologies was a startup that had developed some innovative AI integration tools. I'd been following their progress for months, impressed by their technology but concerned about their business model. Send her in. Catherine Wells was a woman in her 30s with the kind of intensity that marked successful entrepreneurs. She sat across from my desk with the confidence of someone who knew she had something valuable to offer. Ms. Martinez, I'll be direct. Aurora Technologies is looking for an acquisition partner, and Pinnacle Dynamics is our first choice. I leaned back in my chair. I'm listening. Our AI integration platform would complement your existing software perfectly. We have the technology, but we lack the market penetration and customer base to scale effectively. You have the infrastructure and client relationships to make our technology profitable. Over the next hour, Catherine walked me through Aurora's technology, their financial position, and their growth projections. Unlike Marcus's impulsive acquisition decisions, I asked detailed questions about everything from their intellectual property portfolio to their employee retention rates. What kind of acquisition structure are you considering? I asked. We're looking for a strategic partnership that allows us to maintain operational independence while benefiting from Pinnacle's resources and market position. We'd be willing to accept a stock-based deal that aligns our interests with your long-term success. This was exactly the kind of strategic thinking that had been missing from Marcus's acquisition approach. Instead of buying companies for ego or expansion fantasies, we were looking at genuine synergies and shared value creation. I'll need to review your technology in detail and run financial projections, I said, but I'm interested in exploring this further. Of course. I've prepared a complete due diligence package. Catherine handed me a comprehensive folder. I should mention that we've had interest from other companies, but we specifically want to work with Pinnacle because of your reputation for treating acquired companies as partners rather than subsidiaries. That reputation was something I'd built deliberately over the past 6 months. While Marcus had tried to absorb acquired companies completely, often destroying what made them valuable in the process, I believed in strategic integration that preserved each company's strengths. 2 weeks later, I stood before the board of directors to present the Aurora Technologies acquisition proposal. The contrast with Marcus's previous acquisition presentations was stark. Where his had been based on optimism and vague strategic concepts, mine was built on detailed financial analysis and clear integration plans. The acquisition would cost $8 million in stock, I explained, but our projections show that the combined revenue stream would generate an additional $15 million in annual revenue within 18 months. Board member Robert Chen raised his hand. What about integration risks? Your report mentions potential challenges with combining the technology platforms. Excellent question. We've identified 3 main integration challenges, and we've developed specific mitigation strategies for each. I clicked to the next slide. Rather than forcing immediate integration, we're planning a phased approach that allows both teams to work together gradually. The questions continued for another 30 minutes, each one giving me an opportunity to demonstrate the thorough planning that had gone into the proposal. By the end of the presentation, the board had approved the acquisition unanimously. 3 months later, the Aurora integration was complete and exceeded all projections. The combined company was now generating record revenue, and our enhanced software platform had attracted attention from major corporations across the country. More importantly, the acquisition validated my approach to strategic growth. Instead of the desperate, ego-driven expansion that had characterized Marcus's leadership, we were building methodically and sustainably. The annual employee review cycle provided another opportunity to demonstrate how much had changed at Pinnacle Dynamics. Instead of the subjective, politics-driven evaluations of the past, we now had clear performance metrics and objective criteria for advancement. Jennifer Walsh, who'd been stuck in the same position for 3 years under Marcus's leadership, was promoted to Chief Financial Officer. David Chen became Chief Operating Officer. Lisa Rodriguez became Chief Marketing Officer. The people who'd been doing the real work were finally receiving the recognition and compensation they deserved. But the most satisfying moment came during a company-wide meeting where I announced our latest milestone. I'm proud to announce that Pinnacle Dynamics has been named Software Company of the Year by the Regional Business Association, I said to thunderous applause. This recognition reflects the hard work and dedication of every person in this room. After the meeting, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought us to this point. 18 months ago, I'd been the invisible analyst hiding behind a pillar, listening to my boss call me worthless. Now I was leading an award-winning company that had become a model for the industry. The transformation hadn't just been about financial restructuring or operational improvements. It had been about recognizing and unleashing the potential that had always existed within our team. People who'd been marginalized and undervalued had become leaders and innovators when given the opportunity. As I sat in my office that evening, reviewing the day's achievements, I reflected on the lessons learned from this entire experience. The most important lesson was that true leadership isn't about taking credit or maintaining control. It's about creating an environment where everyone can succeed. Marcus had called me worthless because he was threatened by competence. But competence isn't threatening when you understand that success is collaborative rather than competitive. The best leaders don't diminish others to elevate themselves, they elevate others to achieve collective success. The woman who'd once been dismissed as worthless had not only saved a company, but had proven that worth isn't determined by titles or recognition. It's determined by the value you create, the problems you solve, and the positive impact you have on others. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply being undeniably successful. 6 months later, I received an invitation to speak at the National Business Leadership Conference. The topic: From Analyst to CEO, Building Sustainable Success Through Strategic Leadership. As I prepared my presentation, I realized that my story wasn't just about revenge or vindication. It was about transformation, not just of a company, but of what's possible when people are given the opportunity to reach their full potential. The woman who'd been called worthless had built something worth celebrating. And that, perhaps, was the most satisfying victory of all. 2 years after taking over as CEO, I stood in the lobby of our brand new headquarters building, watching the construction crew install the final piece of our company logo. The gleaming 15-story structure in downtown's tech district was a far cry from the modest office building where this story had begun. More importantly, it represented something that Marcus had never understood: sustainable growth built on solid foundations. "It's beautiful," said a voice behind me. I turned to find Elena Vasquez, a reporter from Business Weekly, approaching with her photographer. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview," Elena said, extending her hand. "Our readers are fascinated by your transformation story. From financial analyst to CEO of one of the fastest-growing companies in the region, it's quite remarkable." "The remarkable part isn't my personal journey," I replied, gesturing toward the bustling lobby filled with employees. "It's what happens when you create an environment where talented people can actually do their best work." Elena nodded, pulling out her recorder. "Let's start with the beginning. Tell me about the moment you decided to take control of your destiny." I paused, considering how to frame the story. Over the past 2 years, I'd been asked this question dozens of times by journalists, business schools, and industry conferences. Each time, I'd refined my answer, focusing less on the personal drama and more on the business lessons. "The turning point wasn't a single moment," I said. "It was a gradual realization that I had two choices: continue being undervalued and underutilized, or create opportunities for myself and others who were in similar situations." "But surely there was a catalyst, something that made you decide to act?" I smiled. "There was a company event where I overheard some comments that made me realize how differently I was perceived versus how I actually contributed. That's when I understood that waiting for recognition wasn't a strategy, it was a form of career suicide." Elena's eyes lit up. "Can you be more specific about what you heard?" "Let's just say it became clear that my contributions weren't being valued appropriately. But honestly, that's not the interesting part of the story. The interesting part is what came next." Over the following hour, I walked Elena through the strategic decisions that had transformed Pinnacle Dynamics from a failing company into an industry leader. I showed her our innovation lab, where Aurora Technologies' AI platform was being integrated with our core software. I introduced her to our executive team, including Jennifer Walsh, who'd just been featured in CFO magazine as one of the rising stars of finance. "Your employee retention rate is remarkable," Elena observed. 96% over 2 years. How do you explain that?" "Simple," I replied. "People stay where they're valued, challenged, and given opportunities to grow. We've created a culture where merit matters more than politics, where innovation is rewarded, and where everyone has a clear path for advancement." Elena interviewed several employees, from senior executives to entry-level staff. The consistent theme was the same. Pinnacle Dynamics had become the kind of company where people actually wanted to work, not just somewhere they had to work. "There's one more person I'd like you to meet," I said, leading Elena toward the client relations department. "Marcus Thompson, our Director of Strategic Partnerships." Marcus looked up from his desk, where he was reviewing contracts with potential clients. His workspace was organized and professional, decorated with awards from successful client relationships he'd managed over the past year. "Marcus," I said, "this is Elena Vasquez from Business Weekly. She's doing a feature on our company's transformation." Marcus stood and shook Elena's hand. "Pleasure to meet you. I hope Rebecca's been giving you the full picture of what we've accomplished here." "Actually," Elena said, "I'd love to hear your perspective on the changes." "You've been with the company for quite a while, haven't you?" Marcus nodded. 15 years. I've seen this company go through many phases, but the past 2 years have been extraordinary. The difference is night and day." "What would you say is the biggest change?" Marcus glanced at me, then back at Elena. "The biggest change is that we're finally operating as a team instead of a hierarchy. Everyone's contributions are valued, and decisions are made based on data and strategy rather than ego or politics." "That must have been a difficult transition for some people," Elena observed. "It was," Marcus admitted, "especially for those of us who had been in leadership positions. We had to learn new ways of thinking and leading. But the results speak for themselves." After Elena left, Marcus lingered in my office. "Thank you for including me in the interview. I know you didn't have to." "Your client relationship work has been crucial to our success," I replied. "You found your niche and you're excelling at it." Marcus sat down across from my desk. "I've been thinking about something. Next month marks 3 years since that night at the company party. I looked up from my computer. Has it been that long? 3 years since I said those things about you. 3 years since I made the biggest mistake of my professional life. Marcus leaned forward. I want you to know that not a day goes by that I don't think about how different things could have been if I'd been a better leader back then. Marcus, we've moved past that. You've grown, I've grown, the company has grown. That's what matters. But I need to say this, he continued. What you've built here isn't just a successful company. It's a testament to what leadership actually looks like. You've shown people what it means to be valued, what it means to have their contributions recognized. I studied his face. What are you getting at? I'm starting that consulting firm I mentioned. Client relations and business development for small tech companies. I want to help other entrepreneurs avoid the mistakes I made. That sounds like a perfect fit for your skills. Marcus nodded. I've been thinking about calling it Thomson Strategic Partners. The tagline would be building relationships, not egos. I smiled at that. I like it. It shows you've learned from experience. I have. And I owe that education to you, even though you certainly didn't owe me anything after how I treated you. 6 months later, Marcus's consulting firm was thriving. He'd successfully helped 3 small tech companies improve their client relationships and secure major contracts. More importantly, he'd become an advocate for merit-based leadership and inclusive management practices. But the most significant development came when I received a phone call from Dr. Patricia Henderson, Dean of the Business School at State University. Ms. Martinez, she said, I'm calling to discuss a unique opportunity. We're launching a new executive leadership program focused on strategic transformation and authentic leadership. We'd like you to be our keynote speaker for the program launch. I'm honored by the invitation, I replied. What would you like me to focus on? We want you to share your story, but more importantly, we want you to teach the principles that made your transformation successful. How do you turn around a failing organization? How do you create a culture of merit and innovation? How do you lead authentically in a competitive business environment? The program launch was scheduled for 3 months later, giving me time to develop a comprehensive presentation. But as I worked on the material, I realized that the story had evolved beyond my personal journey. It has become a case study in organizational transformation, leadership development, and the power of recognizing untapped potential. The night before the university presentation, I found myself in my office, reviewing the slides one final time. The presentation was titled, From Invisible to Invaluable, Building Sustainable Success Through Strategic Leadership. Jennifer knocked on my door. Rebecca, are you ready for tomorrow? As ready as I'll ever be, I replied. Are you nervous about the Q&A portion? Jennifer was going to be part of a panel discussion about leadership development and employee empowerment. A little. But I keep thinking about how different my career would be if you hadn't created opportunities for people to grow. You created those opportunities yourself, I said. I just removed the barriers that were preventing you from succeeding. That's exactly what great leadership is, Jennifer replied. Removing barriers instead of creating them. The next morning, I stood before an audience of 300 business students, entrepreneurs, and industry leaders. The auditorium was packed, with people eager to understand how a financial analyst had transformed both herself and her company. 3 years ago, I began, I was invisible. I was the person who did the work but never got the credit, who had the ideas but never got heard, who created value but never got valued. I suspect many of you can relate to that feeling. I could see heads nodding throughout the audience. But being invisible isn't a permanent condition, it's a choice. And the moment you decide to become visible, to become valuable, to become invaluable, everything changes. I walked them through the strategic thinking that had guided my transformation, identifying opportunities, building capabilities, creating value, and leveraging relationships. But I also emphasized the human elements, treating people with respect, recognizing contributions, and creating environments where everyone can succeed. The most important lesson I've learned is that true leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room or the person with the most authority. It's about creating conditions where everyone in the room can be smart, where everyone can contribute, and where everyone can grow. During the Q&A session, a young woman in the front row raised her hand. Ms. Martinez, what would you say to someone who's currently in the position you were in 3 years ago? Someone who feels invisible and undervalued? I paused, thinking about my younger self, sitting in meetings where my ideas were dismissed, working late nights on projects that would bear someone else's name, wondering if I'd ever be recognized for my contributions. I'd say this: start building your own value independent of your current situation. Don't wait for someone else to recognize your worth. Demonstrate it in ways that can't be ignored. And remember that every expert was once a beginner. Every leader was once a follower. And every success story started with someone who decided they deserved better. Another hand went up. What about revenge? Did you ever feel like you were getting back at people who had undervalued you? I smiled at the question. Revenge is a temporary satisfaction. Success is a permanent solution. I wasn't interested in making people feel bad about how they'd treated me. I was interested in creating something so undeniably valuable that the question of worth would never come up again. The presentation ended with a standing ovation, but the real impact came afterward. I was approached by dozens of people sharing their own stories of being undervalued, overlooked, or dismissed. Each conversation reinforced my belief that there are countless talented people waiting for the opportunity to show what they can do. That evening, I had dinner with Dr. Henderson and several faculty members. The conversation centered on the broader implications of my story for business education and leadership development. What you've accomplished, Dr. Henderson said, challenges some fundamental assumptions about how organizations should operate. You've shown that the people doing the work often understand the business better than the people managing it. That's not always true, I replied. But it's true often enough that smart leaders pay attention to insights from every level of the organization. We'd like to invite you to teach a course, said Professor James Wilson, head of the Strategic Management Department. A semester-long seminar on organizational transformation and authentic leadership. I was intrigued. What would that look like? We'd structure it as a case study course, using Pinnacle Dynamics as the primary example. Students would analyze each phase of the transformation, from the initial assessment to the strategic planning to the implementation and results. And I'd be there to provide context and answer questions? Exactly. But more than that, you'd be teaching them to think like transformational leaders. How do you identify opportunities that others miss? How do you build consensus for change? How do you execute complex strategies while maintaining organizational stability? The idea was appealing. Teaching would give me the opportunity to influence the next generation of business leaders, to share lessons that might help them avoid the mistakes I'd seen and experienced. I'd be honored to contribute to your program, I said, but I have one condition. What's that? I want Marcus Thompson to co-teach the course with me. He can provide the perspective of someone who learned to lead differently, who transformed his own approach to management. Dr. Henderson looked surprised. The former CEO? That's an interesting idea. Marcus's story is as important as mine. He represents the possibility of growth and change, even for people who've made significant mistakes. That's a valuable lesson for future leaders. 3 months later, I stood in a university classroom next to Marcus, preparing to teach our first joint seminar. The course was called Leadership Transformation from Dysfunction to Excellence, and it had attracted students from across the business school. Good morning, I said to the class. I'm Rebecca Martinez, and this is Marcus Thompson. We're going to spend this semester exploring one of the most important questions in business. How do organizations transform from underperforming to exceptional? Marcus stepped forward. More specifically, we're going to examine how leadership, both good and bad, shapes organizational culture, employee engagement, and business results. I looked at Marcus, then at the eager faces of our students. 3 years ago, Marcus and I worked together in a very different capacity. He was the CEO, I was a financial analyst. The company was failing, relationships were dysfunctional, and both of us were operating far below our potential. Today, Marcus continued, we're co-teaching this course because we've both learned that transformation is possible, for individuals, for relationships, and for organizations. But it requires courage, honesty, and a commitment to growth. As our students opened their notebooks and prepared to dive into the case study, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The woman who'd been called worthless was now teaching future leaders about worth, value, and the power of authentic leadership. The story that had begun with humiliation and anger had evolved into something much more significant, a testament to the transformative power of believing in yourself, investing in others, and building something bigger than your own success. And perhaps most importantly, it had shown that the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better, and helping others get better too. 5 years after that humiliating night at the company party, I found myself standing in the same grand ballroom, but this time as the keynote speaker for the Regional Business Excellence Awards. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same room where I'd been called worthless was now hosting an event celebrating my achievements as Entrepreneur of the Year. But tonight wasn't about me. Tonight was about something much bigger. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, looking out at an audience of 500 business leaders. 5 years ago, I learned one of the most important lessons of my career. I learned that your worth isn't determined by how others see you. It's determined by what you choose to build with your talents, your vision, and your determination. The audience was attentive, but I could see familiar faces scattered throughout the crowd. Jennifer Walsh, now CFO of her own consulting firm. David Chen, who'd started his own operations management company. Lisa Rodriguez, who'd launched a marketing agency that specializes in helping women-owned businesses. Each of them had taken the confidence they'd gained at Pinnacle Dynamics and used it to build something of their own. Tonight, I want to share with you the story of transformation, not just of a company, but of an entire ecosystem of talent that had been overlooked, undervalued, and underutilized. I clicked to my first slide, showing the original Pinnacle Dynamics team from 6 years ago. This was our executive team when I started as CEO. Notice anything interesting? The audience murmured as they studied the slide. That's right, 4 of the 6 people in this photo now run their own successful companies. They didn't leave because they were unhappy with their success at Pinnacle. They left because they'd gained the confidence and skills to pursue their own entrepreneurial dreams. The next slide showed the current Pinnacle Dynamics leadership team, including several faces that would have been unrecognizable to the old guard. This is our current executive team. Every person in this photo was promoted from within, and every one of them represents a story of someone who was given the opportunity to exceed their own expectations. I paused, allowing the audience to absorb the implications. When we talk about business transformation, we often focus on revenue growth, market share, and operational efficiency. But the most powerful transformation happens when you unlock human potential that was always there, waiting for the right environment to flourish. The presentation continued for another 40 minutes, walking through the evolution of Pinnacle Dynamics from a failing company to an industry leader. But more importantly, I shared the stories of the people who'd been part of that journey. The quiet analysts who became innovative leaders, the overlooked support staff who became strategic thinkers, the dismissed ideas that became breakthrough innovations. The lesson isn't about one person rising from anonymity to success, I concluded. The lesson is about creating systems and cultures where everyone has the opportunity to rise. Where worth is measured by contribution, not by politics. Where leadership is about empowering others, not just exercising authority. The standing ovation was gratifying, but the real satisfaction came during the networking reception that followed. I was approached by dozens of people sharing their own stories of transformation, their struggles with being undervalued, and their dreams of creating something meaningful. One conversation particularly stood out. A young man named David Kim approached me with obvious nervousness. "Ms. Martinez, I'm currently working as a junior analyst at Morrison & Associates. I've been there for 3 years, and I feel like I'm invisible. My ideas get dismissed, my contributions go unrecognized, and I'm starting to wonder if I'm just not cut out for this industry." I studied his earnest face, recognizing something of my younger self in his expression. "Tell me about your ideas. What are you working on that you think could make a difference?" David's eyes lit up as he began describing his analysis of market trends in renewable energy investments. His insights were sophisticated, his methodology was sound, and his passion was unmistakable. He was exactly the kind of talent that Marcus had been unable to recognize in me. "David," I said, "you're not invisible because you lack talent. You're invisible because you're in the wrong environment. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't have the resources to start my own company, and I don't have the connections to find a better position." I smiled. "Let me tell you something. 5 years ago, I didn't have the connections either. What I had was a plan, a strategy, and the determination to execute it. Everything else I built along the way. I handed him my business card. Send me your analysis of the renewable energy market. If it's as good as you say it is, I might have an opportunity for you. 3 weeks later, David Kim became Pinnacle Dynamics Director of Sustainable Investment Strategy, tasked with developing our new green technology portfolio. His first presentation to our board was so impressive that we allocated $15 million to his recommended investments. But David's story was just one of many. The ripple effects of creating an environment where talent could flourish had extended far beyond Pinnacle Dynamics. The people who'd gained confidence working for us had gone on to create their own companies, mentor other overlooked employees, and spread the principles of merit-based leadership throughout the industry. Marcus's consulting firm had become one of the most respected in the region, specifically because of his focus on helping companies identify and develop overlooked talent. His tagline, "Building relationships, not egos," had become a rallying cry for a new generation of leaders who understood that sustainable success required authentic leadership. The university course Marcus and I co-taught had become so popular that it was now offered every semester, with a waiting list of students eager to learn about transformational leadership. We'd published a case study based on the Pinnacle Dynamics transformation, and it was being used in business schools across the country. But perhaps the most significant development came 6 months after the awards ceremony, when I received a call from Sarah Chen, the investor representative who'd played such a crucial role in my original plan. "Rebecca, I have an interesting proposition for you. I've been approached by a consortium of investors who want to create a new type of investment fund, one that focuses specifically on companies with untapped leadership potential." I was intrigued. "What do you mean by untapped leadership potential?" "Companies where the real strategic thinking is happening at the analyst level, where the best ideas are coming from overlooked employees, where the current leadership is creating barriers rather than removing them. Basically, companies that are in the same position Pinnacle Dynamics was in 5 years ago." The concept was fascinating. Instead of traditional venture capital or private equity, this would be transformation capital. Investments designed to unlock existing potential rather than just fund expansion. "The investors want you to lead the fund," Sarah continued. "They want to replicate what you did at Pinnacle Dynamics on a larger scale, across multiple industries." I leaned back in my chair, considering the implications. That's a significant undertaking. We're talking about fundamentally changing how business leadership operates. That's exactly what they want to do. They've seen the results you achieved, not just in terms of financial returns, but in terms of human capital development. They want to scale that approach. Over the following months, I worked with Sarah and the investor consortium to develop the framework for what we called the Potential Capital Fund. Our investment thesis was simple: identify companies with talented but underutilized employees, invest in leadership transitions that would unleash that talent, and create sustainable value through authentic leadership development. The fund launched with $200 million in committed capital and a mandate to invest in companies across the technology, manufacturing, and service sectors. Our first investment was in a struggling software company in Denver, where a brilliant systems architect named Maria Santos had been working for 4 years under a CEO who consistently dismissed her recommendations. The parallels to my own story were striking. Maria had developed innovative solutions that could have revolutionized the company's product line, but her ideas were ignored in favor of the CEO's pet projects. The company was losing market share, bleeding talent, and facing potential bankruptcy. Our investment provided the capital needed to restructure the company's leadership, with Maria taking over as CEO and the former CEO transitioning to a business development role. Within 18 months, the company had launched Maria's innovative platform, secured major contracts, and became profitable for the first time in 3 years. But the real success wasn't just financial. Maria's leadership style, influenced by the principles we'd developed at Pinnacle Dynamics, created an environment where other overlooked employees began to shine. The company's junior developers started contributing strategic insights, their customer service team identified new market opportunities, and their financial analyst uncovered cost savings that had been hidden by poor management practices. The second investment was in a manufacturing company in Ohio, where a production supervisor named James Wright had been trying for 2 years to convince management to implement efficiency improvements that could save millions of dollars annually. The third was in a consulting firm in Texas, where a junior partner named Angela Rodriguez had developed a client service methodology that was being quietly adopted by competitors while her own firm ignored it. Each investment followed the same pattern: identify the overlooked talent, provide the capital and support needed to elevate that talent to leadership positions, and create systems that would prevent future mismanagement of human resources. 2 years after launching the Potential Capital Fund, we had invested in 12 companies across 8 states. Every single investment had resulted in significant improvements in both financial performance and employee satisfaction. More importantly, the leaders we'd identified and supported were now mentoring others, creating a network of authentic leaders who understood the value of recognizing and developing talent. The fund's success attracted attention from major institutional investors, business schools, and government agencies interested in economic development. We were invited to present our model at the World Economic Forum, where I shared the stage with other leaders who were working to create more inclusive and effective business environments. But the moment that brought everything full circle came during our annual investor meeting, held at the same hotel where I'd first confronted Marcus about his treatment of me. The ballroom was packed with investors, portfolio company executives, and representatives from the companies we'd transformed. As I stood at the podium, preparing to present our third-year results, I spotted several familiar faces in the audience. Marcus was there, representing his consulting firm's partnership with the fund. Jennifer, David, and Lisa were there as successful entrepreneurs who'd become limited partners in the fund. And in the front row, I saw David Kim, who'd just been promoted to managing director of our West Coast operations. 3 years ago, I began, we launched the Potential Capital Fund with a simple thesis: that every organization has untapped potential waiting to be discovered and developed. Today, I'm proud to report that our 12 portfolio companies have generated an average return of 340%, while creating over 2,000 new jobs and promoting 156 employees to leadership positions. The applause was enthusiastic, but I held up my hand to continue. But the numbers only tell part of the story. The real story is about Maria Santos, who went from ignored architect to innovative CEO. James Wright, who went from frustrated supervisor to transformational operations leader. Angela Rodriguez, who went from overlooked junior partner to industry-recognized expert. I clicked to the next slide, showing photos of our portfolio company leaders. These are the faces of transformation, not just business transformation, but personal transformation. They represent the thousands of talented people who are waiting for someone to recognize their worth, to invest in their potential, to give them the opportunity to lead. As I continued the presentation, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The woman who'd been called worthless had not only proven her own value, but had created a system for identifying and developing value in others. The humiliation that had motivated my original plan had evolved into something much more significant: a mission to ensure that talent wasn't wasted, that potential wasn't overlooked, and that worth wasn't determined by politics or bias. After the presentation, I found myself in conversation with Dr. Patricia Henderson, who'd been instrumental in developing our university partnerships. "Rebecca, I've been thinking about something," she said. "What you've created here goes beyond business transformation. You've created a new model for how societies can develop and utilize human capital." I nodded. "That's exactly what it is. We're not just changing companies. We're changing how companies think about people, how they identify talent, how they develop leaders. Have you considered writing a book about this? The principles you've developed could have an impact far beyond the business world." The idea had been percolating in my mind for months. I've been thinking about it, but I want to make sure it's not just about my story. I want it to be about the hundreds of people who've been part of this transformation. That's exactly what would make it powerful. Not just one person's journey from invisible to invaluable, but a comprehensive guide for creating systems where everyone can become invaluable. 6 months later, I found myself back in the same coffee shop where I'd first met with Sarah Chen to discuss the Sterling Investment Group proposal. But this time, I was meeting with a publisher to discuss my book proposal. The working title is The Invisible Advantage: Unlocking Hidden Talent in Every Organization, I explained. It's part memoir, part business strategy guide, part manual for creating inclusive leadership cultures. The publisher, Margaret Chen, reviewed the proposal with obvious interest. The market is hungry for authentic leadership content, especially from someone who's demonstrated real results. What makes your approach different from other leadership books? Most leadership books are written by people who are always visible, always recognized, always in positions of authority. This book is written from the perspective of someone who was invisible, who understands what it's like to be overlooked and undervalued. It's for the millions of people who are currently in that position, and for the leaders who want to do better at recognizing and developing talent. Margaret nodded. And you're planning to include the stories of other people who've been part of this transformation? Absolutely. Maria Santos, James Wright, Angela Rodriguez, David Kim, dozens of people who've gone from overlooked to essential. Their stories are just as important as mine, and they demonstrate that transformation is possible for anyone, in any industry, at any level. The book was published 18 months later and became a bestseller within 6 weeks. But more importantly, it sparked conversations in organizations across the country about how to identify and develop overlooked talent. Companies began implementing, quote, invisible advantage assessments, looking for employees whose contributions were undervalued or ideas that were being ignored. The ripple effects were extraordinary. A manufacturing company in Michigan discovered that their most innovative ideas were coming from line workers who'd never been asked for their input. A tech startup in California realized that their customer service team had insights that could revolutionize their product development. A consulting firm in New York found that their junior associates had developed methodologies that were more effective than their senior partners' approaches. Each discovery led to promotions, new opportunities, and improved business results. But, more importantly, each discovery represented a person who'd been seen and valued for their true contributions. The final chapter of my story, or perhaps the beginning of the next chapter, came during the 5th anniversary celebration of the Potential Capital Fund. We'd gathered at the same grand ballroom where my journey had begun, but this time, the room was filled with success stories, transformed companies, and leaders who understood the value of recognizing talent wherever it existed. As I stood at the podium looking out at the faces of investors, entrepreneurs, and executives who'd become part of our mission, I reflected on the distance I'd traveled from that humiliating night 5 years earlier. 5 years ago, I said, I was called worthless in this very room. Tonight, I stand before you as the leader of a fund that has invested in 47 companies, created over 10,000 jobs, and helped more than 500 people transition from overlooked employees to recognized leaders. The applause was warm and sustained, but I held up my hand. But the real victory isn't my personal success. The real victory is that we've proven something important, that talent exists everywhere, that potential is universal, and that worth isn't determined by visibility or recognition. It's determined by what you contribute, what you create, and what you make possible for others. I paused, looking directly at the section where Marcus was sitting with several of his consulting clients, people he was helping to develop their own leadership capabilities. I want to thank everyone who's been part of this journey, including those who challenged me, doubted me, or underestimated me. Your skepticism forced me to prove not just my own worth, but the worth of every person who's ever been dismissed, overlooked, or undervalued. As the evening wound down, I found myself in conversation with a young woman named Christine Park, a financial analyst at one of our portfolio companies. Ms. Martinez, she said, I just wanted to thank you. 6 months ago, I was ready to quit my job because I felt invisible. But after my company was acquired by your fund, everything changed. My ideas are being heard, my contributions are being recognized, and I'm being developed as a future leader. I smiled, seeing something of my younger self in her earnest expression. Christine, you were never invisible. You were just in the wrong environment. The question now is, what are you going to do with this opportunity? Her eyes lit up with determination. I'm going to make sure that other people don't have to feel invisible. I'm going to be the kind of leader who recognizes talent, develops potential, and creates opportunities for others. As Christine walked away, I realized that the transformation was complete. The woman who'd been called worthless had not only proven her own value, but had created a system that would continue to identify and develop overlooked talent long after her own story was finished. The champagne glass that had shattered on this same marble floor 5 years earlier had been replaced by something much more durable, a network of authentic leaders who understood that true worth comes not from being seen, but from ensuring that others are seen as well. The woman who'd been dismissed as worthless had become invaluable. But more importantly, she'd made it possible for countless others to discover their own invaluable contributions. And that, perhaps, was the most satisfying revenge of all, proving that worthlessness was never about talent or potential. It was about the failure of leadership to recognize and develop the extraordinary capabilities that had been there all along. The story that had begun with humiliation and anger had become a legacy of transformation, opportunity, and hope. And in the end, that was worth more than any momentary satisfaction that revenge could have provided. 3 months after the anniversary celebration, I received an unexpected call from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Dr. Amanda Foster, the Deputy Director, was calling to discuss a national initiative on workplace innovation and talent development. Ms. Martinez, we've been following your work with the Potential Capital Fund and the broader impact it's having on American business culture. We're launching a federal program called the National Talent Initiative, and we'd like you to serve as the private sector advisor. The program was ambitious in scope, a 3-year, billion-dollar initiative designed to help companies across America identify and develop overlooked talent. It would provide grants, training programs, and consulting services to businesses that committed to implementing inclusive leadership practices. The goal, Dr. Foster explained, is to ensure that American businesses are utilizing their full human capital potential. Your model has demonstrated that there's tremendous economic value in recognizing and developing talent that's currently being wasted. I was honored by the invitation, but also daunted by the scale of the challenge. Dr. Foster, what we've accomplished with the Potential Capital Fund is significant, but scaling it nationally would require resources and infrastructure we don't currently have. That's exactly why we need your expertise. We're not asking you to do this alone. We're asking you to help us design a system that can be implemented by thousands of organizations across the country. The conversation continued for over an hour, covering everything from measurement criteria to implementation timelines. By the end, I'd agreed to serve as the program's private sector advisor, with the understanding that I'd be working with a team of economists, organizational psychologists, and business development experts. The National Talent Initiative launched 6 months later with a ceremony at the Department of Commerce. I stood beside Secretary of Commerce Robert Williams as he announced the program to a room packed with CEOs, government officials, and media representatives. Today, we're acknowledging something that successful businesses have always known but haven't always acted upon: that talent exists at every level of every organization, Secretary Williams said. The National Talent Initiative will help American companies unlock that talent, creating more productive workplaces, more innovative solutions, and more fulfilling careers for millions of Americans. The program's first phase focused on mid-sized companies in manufacturing, technology, and services. We provided assessment tools to help organizations identify employees whose contributions were being undervalued, training programs to help managers develop more inclusive leadership styles, and financial incentives for companies that successfully promoted overlooked talent into leadership positions. The results exceeded our most optimistic projections. Within the first year, participating companies reported an average productivity increase of 23%, with employee satisfaction scores rising by 31%. More significantly, over 3,000 employees received promotions or new opportunities that they wouldn't have had access to under traditional management approaches. One of the most compelling success stories came from a manufacturing company in Detroit. Patricia Williams, a quality control supervisor, had been working for the same company for 8 years. Her supervisors saw her as competent but unremarkable, suitable for her current role but not management material. The National Talent Initiative assessment revealed something different. Patricia had been quietly developing solutions to production problems that had saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. Her suggestions for process improvements had been implemented without fanfare, and her ability to mentor new employees had reduced turnover in her department by 40%. Following the program's recommendations, Patricia was promoted to operations manager and given responsibility for implementing her process improvements company-wide. Within 18 months, her innovations had increased overall productivity by 15% and generated cost savings of over $2 million annually. But Patricia's story represented more than individual success. Her promotion had a ripple effect throughout the company. Other employees began speaking up with their own ideas, knowing they would be heard and evaluated fairly. The company's culture shifted from one of hierarchical control to collaborative innovation. The program didn't just change my career, Patricia told me during a follow-up interview. It changed how our entire company thinks about people. We're not just looking for talent in the usual places anymore. We're looking everywhere, and we're finding it. The program's success led to international attention. I was invited to present our model at the OECD's annual meeting on economic development, where government officials and business leaders from 30 countries gathered to discuss best practices for talent development. The American approach to identifying overlooked talent has produced remarkable results, said Dr. Klaus Weber, Germany's Minister of Economic Affairs. We're seeing productivity gains, innovation increases, and employee satisfaction improvements that traditional management consultants haven't been able to achieve. The presentation sparked interest from governments around the world. Within 6 months, I was working with implementation teams in Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, and several European Union countries to adapt our model for their business cultures and regulatory environments. Each international implementation brought new insights and refinements to our approach. The Canadian program, for example, placed special emphasis on Indigenous talent development, recognizing that traditional corporate structures often overlooked the unique perspectives and skills of First Nations employees. The Australian implementation focused on rural and remote businesses, using technology to connect overlooked talent in small communities with mentorship and development opportunities in major cities. The UK program emphasized diversity and inclusion, specifically targeting the advancement of women and minorities in traditionally male-dominated industries. But perhaps the most significant development came 2 years after the National Talent Initiative's launch, when I received a call from Professor Michael Chen at MIT's Sloan School of Management. Rebecca, we've been analyzing the data from your various programs, and we're seeing something remarkable. Companies that have implemented your talent identification and development protocols are outperforming their competitors by significant margins across multiple metrics. Professor Chen's research team had been tracking the performance of over 500 companies that had participated in various versions of our programs. Their analysis revealed that these companies were not only more profitable and productive, but also more innovative, more resilient during economic downturns, and more successful at attracting and retaining top talent. What's particularly interesting, Professor Chen continued, is that the benefits appear to compound over time. Companies that have been using your methods for 3 years or more are showing even greater performance advantages than those that have been using them for shorter periods. The research findings were published in the Harvard Business Review under the title, "The Invisible Advantage: How Overlooked Talent Drives Competitive Success." The article became one of the most read pieces in the publication's history, generating discussions in boardrooms, business schools, and policy circles around the world. The attention led to an invitation that I never could have imagined when I was sitting in my cubicle, feeling invisible and undervalued. The World Economic Forum asked me to deliver the opening keynote address at their annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland. Standing before an audience of world leaders, CEOs, and Nobel laureates, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The woman who had once been called worthless was now addressing the most influential gathering of business and political leaders in the world. 5 years ago, I began. I was an invisible employee at a struggling company. Today, I'm speaking to you about one of the most significant economic opportunities of our time: the systematic identification and development of overlooked talent. I walked the audience through the data that Professor Chen's team had compiled, showing how companies that prioritize talent development were outperforming their competitors across every meaningful metric. But more importantly, I shared the human stories behind the numbers. Every percentage point of productivity improvement represents real people whose talents have been recognized and developed. Every dollar of increased revenue represents someone who is given the opportunity to contribute at their highest level. Every innovation represents an idea that might have been lost if we hadn't been looking for it. The response was extraordinary. By the end of the week, I had received meeting requests from government officials representing 12 countries, CEOs from 43 major corporations, and heads of development organizations from 6 continents. But the most meaningful conversation came with Elena Petrov, a young economist from Estonia, who approached me after the presentation. "Ms. Martinez, your story gives me hope. I'm currently working as a research assistant at the Ministry of Economic Affairs, and I feel like my ideas are being ignored. I've developed proposals for economic development programs that I believe could significantly impact our country's growth, but my supervisor dismisses them without serious consideration. I listened to Elena describe her situation, hearing echoes of my own experience years earlier. Her ideas were sophisticated, her analysis was thorough, and her passion was evident. She was exactly the kind of talent that traditional structures often failed to recognize. "Elena," I said, "you have two choices. You can wait for someone else to recognize your value, or you can create opportunities to demonstrate it yourself. Which choice do you think is more likely to lead to the outcomes you want?" 6 months later, Elena had left her government position to start her own economic consulting firm. Her first client was the Estonian Ministry of Economic Affairs, which had hired her to implement the very programs her former supervisor had dismissed. Within a year, her firm had expanded to serve clients across the Baltic region, and she'd been appointed to the European Union's Committee on Economic Innovation. Elena's story was just one of hundreds that had emerged from the various programs and initiatives we'd launched. Each success story represented not just individual achievement, but validation of the principle that talent exists everywhere, waiting to be recognized and developed. As I prepared to return to the United States from Davos, I received a text message from Christine Park, the young analyst I'd met at our anniversary celebration. "Rebecca, I wanted to let you know that I've been promoted to Vice President of Strategic Development at our company. More importantly, I've started a mentorship program for junior analysts. We're not going to let anyone feel invisible anymore." That message crystallized something I'd been thinking about throughout the week. The programs we'd created, the initiatives we'd launched, the policies we'd influenced, they were all important, but the real victory was in the mindset shift we'd achieved. We'd created a generation of leaders who understood that their job wasn't just to succeed themselves, but to ensure that others had the opportunity to succeed as well. The invisible had become invaluable, and in doing so, had made the invisible visible for generations to come. The story that had begun with one person's humiliation had become a movement that was transforming how organizations around the world thought about talent, potential, and worth. And perhaps most importantly, we'd proven that the best response to being called worthless isn't to prove your worth to the person who dismissed you, it's to create a world where such dismissals become impossible, where talent is recognized wherever it exists, and where everyone has the opportunity to contribute at their highest level. The woman who had been called worthless had not only proven her own value, but had fundamentally changed how value is recognized, developed, and celebrated. And that transformation would continue long after her own story was finished, carried forward by the countless people who would never again have to feel invisible, undervalued, or worthless. In the end, the greatest revenge wasn't getting even. It was making sure that no one else would ever have to experience what I experienced, and that every person with talent and determination would have the opportunity to show the world what they were truly worth. The 10th anniversary of that fateful company party arrived with an invitation that would have seemed impossible a decade earlier. Harvard Business School requested that I deliver the commencement address to their graduating MBA class, the same institution that had once rejected my application for their executive program when Marcus refused to provide a recommendation. Standing at the podium in Harvard's historic Sanders Theater, I looked out at 900 graduating students who would soon enter the business world as leaders, consultants, and entrepreneurs. These weren't just students. They were future decision-makers who would shape how organizations operated for decades to come. 10 years ago, I began, I was rejected from this very institution. Not because I lacked the qualifications, but because I lacked the support of someone who didn't recognize my potential. Today, I stand before you not as someone seeking validation, but as someone who has learned that the most powerful validation comes from the impact you create in the world. I shared the story of transformation, not just my own, but the systematic change that had rippled through thousands of organizations worldwide. The students were captivated, many taking notes on their tablets as I walked through the evolution from personal struggle to global movement. "You're entering a business world that's fundamentally different from the one I encountered 15 years ago," I continued. "Thanks to the work of countless leaders who've embraced inclusive practices, the question is no longer whether organizations should recognize overlooked talent. It's how quickly they can implement systems to do so." After the ceremony, I was approached by Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, Harvard's Dean of Faculty Development. "Rebecca, we have a proposition for you. We'd like to establish the Martinez Center for Inclusive Leadership here at Harvard Business School. It would be the first research center dedicated specifically to studying and promoting the identification of overlooked talent in organizational settings. The proposed center would house a team of researchers, provide consulting services to organizations worldwide, and offer executive education programs based on the principles we'd developed. It would also serve as a repository for success stories and best practices from the hundreds of companies that had implemented our approaches. The center would have an annual budget of $5 million and a mandate to work with organizations across all sectors, Dr. Morrison explained. We want to ensure that the principles you've pioneered continue to evolve and reach new markets. The Martinez Center for Inclusive Leadership opened 18 months later, with a ribbon-cutting ceremony attended by business leaders, government officials, and academic researchers from around the world. The center's first major initiative was a comprehensive study of talent identification practices across Fortune 500 companies, revealing that organizations using our methodologies were outperforming their peers by an average of 28% in both revenue growth and employee retention. But the center's most significant contribution came through its fellowship program, which brought together overlooked employees from companies worldwide for intensive leadership development. The fellows spent 6 months at Harvard studying organizational psychology, strategic management, and leadership principles, then returned to their organizations as champions of inclusive practices. The first cohort of 20 fellows included participants from 6 continents and 15 industries. There was Raj Patel, a software engineer from Mumbai, whose innovative coding approaches had been dismissed by his supervisors. Maria Gonzalez, a quality assurance manager from Mexico City, who had developed supply chain optimizations that could save her company millions. James Okafor, an accountant from Lagos who had identified financial inefficiencies that his multinational employer had been ignoring for years. Each fellow returned to their organization with not just enhanced skills, but with a network of peers who understood the challenges of being overlooked and the strategies for overcoming those barriers. The program created a global community of advocates for inclusive leadership, each working to ensure that talent was recognized and developed wherever it existed. The ripple effects were extraordinary. Raj Patel was promoted to Chief Technology Officer and implemented his innovations across his company's global operations, resulting in a 40% improvement in system efficiency. Maria Gonzalez became Director of Operations and led a supply chain transformation that increased profitability by 15%. James Okafor was appointed Chief Financial Officer and restructured his company's African operations, unlocking new markets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But perhaps the most significant development came when the fellowship program began attracting attention from an unexpected source: the children of executives who had participated in our various initiatives. I received a call from Amanda Thompson, Marcus's daughter, who had just graduated from Stanford Business School. Ms. Martinez, I hope you remember me from the company events when I was younger. I wanted to thank you for what you did for my father. Amanda had watched her father's transformation from an insecure, ego-driven executive to a confident, collaborative leader. Dad talks about you all the time, she said. Not as the person who took his job, but as the person who taught him how to be a better leader and, honestly, a better person. Amanda had started her career as a management consultant, specializing in organizational transformation. I want to follow in your footsteps, she explained. I want to help companies identify and develop their overlooked talent. I've seen firsthand how much difference it makes. The conversation led to Amanda joining the Martinez Center as a research associate, where she began developing new methodologies for identifying potential leaders among recent college graduates. Her research revealed that many of the most talented new employees were being overlooked by traditional recruitment and development programs that favored extroverted, self-promotional candidates over those with deeper analytical skills and innovative thinking. We're missing incredible talent right from the start, Amanda explained during one of our research meetings. Companies are hiring people who know how to interview well, not necessarily people who know how to contribute well. We need to change that. Amanda's research led to the development of new assessment tools that evaluated candidates based on problem-solving ability, collaborative skills, and innovative thinking, rather than just presentation skills and networking ability. Companies that implemented these tools reported significant improvements in both employee performance and retention rates. The success of Amanda's work attracted attention from Silicon Valley, where several major tech companies were struggling with diversity and inclusion issues. They invited Amanda to lead a comprehensive review of their talent identification and development processes. Her findings were sobering. Despite these companies' stated commitments to diversity and inclusion, their actual practices were systematically excluding talented individuals who didn't fit traditional leadership profiles. Brilliant engineers were being passed over for management roles because they weren't charismatic presenters. Innovative thinkers were being marginalized because they didn't conform to established corporate cultures. We found that these companies were losing millions of dollars in productivity and innovation because they were promoting people based on politics and personality rather than competence and contribution, Amanda reported to the company's leadership teams. The implementation of Amanda's recommendations led to dramatic improvements. One company saw a 50% increase in patent applications within 18 months of changing their promotion criteria. Another reduced employee turnover by 35% after implementing more inclusive leadership development programs. A third company launched 3 new product lines based on innovations from previously overlooked employees. But the most gratifying development came when Amanda called to tell me about her father's latest achievement. Marcus had been invited to speak at the International Conference on Ethical Leadership, where he would share his story of transformation from an ego-driven executive to a collaborative leader. Dad's speech is titled, "The Executive Who Lost His Way and Found His Purpose," Amanda said. He's going to talk about how recognizing and developing other people's talents became more fulfilling than protecting his own ego. Marcus's presentation was received with a standing ovation, and he was subsequently invited to join the advisory board of the Global Leadership Institute, where he would help develop training programs for executives transitioning to more inclusive leadership styles. The transformation was complete. The man who had once called me worthless had become an advocate for recognizing worth in others. His daughter had dedicated her career to ensuring that overlooked talent was never again dismissed or ignored. The cycle of exclusion had been broken and replaced with a cycle of inclusion and empowerment. Meanwhile, the Potential Capital Fund had grown to manage over $2 billion in assets, with portfolio companies spanning every major industry and 6 continents. Our most recent annual report showed that companies in our portfolio had created over 50,000 jobs, promoted more than 3,000 previously overlooked employees to leadership positions, and generated combined revenues of over $15 billion. But the statistics, impressive as they were, only told part of the story. The real impact was in the cultural transformation that had occurred across the business world. Terms like invisible talent, overlooked potential, and inclusive leadership had become standard vocabulary in corporate boardrooms and business schools. The principles we had pioneered were being taught in management courses, implemented in government agencies, and adopted by nonprofit organizations. The idea that talent existed everywhere, waiting to be recognized and developed, had become conventional wisdom rather than revolutionary thinking. This cultural shift became evident during the 15th anniversary celebration of the Potential Capital Fund. The event was held at the United Nations headquarters in New York, with delegates from 40 countries attending to discuss the global impact of inclusive leadership practices. Secretary General Isabella Rodriguez opened the ceremony with remarks about the economic and social benefits of recognizing overlooked talent. The principles developed by Rebecca Martinez and her colleagues have contributed to economic growth, social mobility, and workplace satisfaction across the globe, she said. This is not just about business success. It's about human dignity and the fundamental right of every person to contribute their talents to society. As I prepared to address the assembly, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The woman who had once hidden behind a pillar, listening to her boss call her worthless, was now speaking to representatives of the world's nations about the importance of recognizing and developing human potential. 15 years ago, I began, I learned that being called worthless says nothing about your actual worth. It says everything about the limitations of the person making that judgment. Today, we've created a world where such judgments are not only inappropriate, but economically counterproductive. I shared the latest research from the Martinez Center, which showed that countries implementing inclusive leadership practices were experiencing higher rates of economic growth, innovation, Sabanan, and social mobility. Nations that had embraced our principles were outperforming those that had not across multiple measures of prosperity and development. The choice facing organizations and nations today is not whether to recognize overlooked talent, I continued. It's how quickly they can implement systems to do so. Those who adapt will thrive. Those who don't will find themselves at a competitive disadvantage in an increasingly complex global economy. After the ceremony, I was approached by Dr. Sarah Kim, a researcher from Seoul National University, who had been studying the long-term impacts of our various initiatives. Ms. Martinez, our research indicates that the children of employees who have been promoted through your programs are showing higher levels of educational achievement and career aspirations. It appears that recognizing and developing overlooked talent has intergenerational benefits that extend far beyond the workplace. Dr. Kim's research revealed that children whose parents had been promoted through our programs were more likely to pursue higher education, more confident in their own abilities, and more likely to believe that hard work and talent would be recognized and rewarded. You've created a positive feedback loop, Dr. Kim explained. Parents who experience recognition and advancement in their careers are better able to support their children's development. Those children grow up with higher expectations and greater confidence, which leads to higher achievement and stronger contributions to society. The conversation reminded me of something I'd learned throughout this journey. Transformation isn't just about changing individual careers or even individual organizations. It's about changing the fundamental beliefs people hold about what's possible, what they deserve, and what they can contribute. As I flew back to the United States from New York, I received a message from Christine Park, who had continued to advance in her career and was now CEO of her own investment firm. Rebecca, I wanted to let you know that my company just closed our first fund, $500 million dedicated to investing in women-led businesses that are being overlooked by traditional venture capital. We're calling it the Visibility Fund, and we're using all the principles you taught us about recognizing undervalued potential. Christine's message was followed by dozens of others from people whose careers had been transformed by our various programs. Each message represented not just individual success, but evidence that the principles we'd pioneered were being carried forward by a new generation of leaders who understood the importance of recognizing and developing overlooked talent. The woman who had been called worthless had created something that was, in the truest sense, invaluable. A systematic approach to ensuring that human potential was recognized, developed, and celebrated wherever it existed. And that approach would continue to create value long after her own story was finished, carried forward by the countless people who would never again have to feel invisible, undervalued, or worthless. The greatest revenge hadn't been proving my worth to the person who dismissed me. It had been creating a world where such dismissals became impossible, where talent was recognized wherever it existed, and where everyone had the opportunity to contribute at their highest level. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.